Now, who would have thought at week 12 of the fantasy football season, when we have 6 teams on bye, that the player we would be missing the most would be Taysom Hill? What is going on, Headliner Nation? Hopefully everyone is doing well out there today. As you can tell, I'm not at home. I'm not in my office. I'm out in Arizona helping the family get through some of the issues that we're currently dealing with. I greatly appreciate all the support here that I've received over the last week or so from the community. It definitely means a lot. But just because I'm out here doesn't mean that the fantasy videos are gonna stop. So let's go ahead and take a look at the top 15 tight ends for week 12. But first, some of my bigger hits and misses from week 11. Now, when it comes to hits at the tight end position, I had the likes of Taysom Hill, Zach Ertz, and David Njoku. Now, for Taysom Hill, I had him up inside my top 10 last week and have been pushing him for weeks. Hopefully, you benefited from it. How about Zach Ertz? I had him up inside my top 12 last week, and he was the only Washington ball catcher to do any damn thing in week 11. And then David Njoku. And last week, I talked about him being a little bit more big play dependent. And because of that, I put him at the bottom of tier 1. He ended up finishing as the tight end 7 overall. Now, when it comes to some of the bigger misses on the week, basically everyone else besides who's listed above. There were so many underperforming tight ends in week 11, it's enough to make you sick, so much that I want to forget about it and move on to week 12. Let's bring up tier 1 for the tight end position. And let's kick it off right here in tier 1 with Travis Kelce, Trey McBride, George Kittle, and Brock Bowers. Now for Travis Kelce, he's going up against Carolina, and I'm not letting one bad game in week 11 deter me from the fact that Travis Kelce's volume has been great, and this matchup doesn't get any better. There is not one team in the NFL who allows more fantasy points per game to the tight end position than the Carolina Panthers, so Travis Kelce atop the rankings at number 1. Then we have Trey McBride going up against Seattle. He's coming off the bye week, and really, there's no reason for me to think that he doesn't remain the top pass-catching option here in Arizona. The only thing missing from Trey McBride's game here this year is touchdowns. He's yet to find the end zone. But now a matchup going up against Seattle, who allows just over 9 fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. I would not be surprised if he doesn't have at least 1, maybe even 2 chances at a touchdown here this week. Then we go down to George Kittle going up against Green Bay. And he didn't play last week, but he's scheduled to return to practice this week. But we also have to pay attention to the availability of Brock Purdy, who's dealing with some shoulder soreness. Now, no way anyone on earth sits George Kittle if he's healthy, because Green Bay allows the 12th most fantasy points per game to the tight end position. How about Brock Bowers to round out tier 1 going up against Denver? Now he's coming off a career high in targets, receptions, and yards. It's safe to say he's going to be fed weekly and has that really big play ability. Now this is not the easiest of matchups going up against Denver. They allow only 8 fantasy points per game to tight ends, but Brock Bowers, we saw last week, has a ceiling so high we can't afford to sit him or remove him from tier 1. Now, after tier 1, we go down to tier 2, where we have the likes of David Njoku, Cade Otton, TJ Hawkinson, Jonnu Smith, Zach Ertz, and Hunter Henry. For David Njoku, he's going up against Pittsburgh. Now, he's currently questionable to play with a knee injury. Another one of these players we need to pay attention to here as the week progresses. But Elijah Moore is also questionable, so if David Njoku can get on the field, he could see increased targets in this matchup. Now, Pittsburgh, they allow just under 9 fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends, so it is a tough matchup. Then we got Cade Otton going up against the Giants. He's coming off the bye, and honestly, it doesn't matter to me whether Mike Evans returns or not. Cade Otton has solidified his role in this offense and will continue to be a top option for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But there is no team in the NFL that allows less fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends than the New York Giants, so fingers crossed for this matchup. There is a lot of risk. After him, we got TJ Hawkinson going up against Chicago, and a bad time for him to have a bad game in week 11. Now has a matchup against a tough Chicago defense, which doesn't help anything either, because Chicago allows the 11th fewest fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. But with tight end Josh Oliver currently dealing with an ankle injury, we could see even more targets going the way of TJ Hawkinson here in week 12. Then we got Jonnu Smith going up against New England. And is this the Jonnu revenge game? He's really been more a part of this offense here as of late. He's had at least 6 targets now in 5 of his last 6 games, and New England allows just under the league average to opposing tight ends. Now, with the way the Miami offense has looked here as of late, you got to think that Jonnu Smith has touchdown opportunities each and every week. Now, after him, we got Zach Ertz going up against Dallas, and Washington struggled overall against Philadelphia in week 11, but Ertz kind of saved his fantasy day with a late touchdown. He's had 7+ targets in 3 of his last 4 contests, and Dallas allows right around the league average of 8.9 fantasy points per game to the tight end position. How about Hunter Henry? He's going up against Miami. Now, no QB is out there completing more passes for fewer yards right now than Drake May. Bay. And Hunter Henry isn't some big play guy anyway, and the touchdown chances aren't going to be there very often. Now, Miami does allow just over 9 fantasy points per game to tight ends, so I got Hunter Henry right here inside the top 10 at number 10. Which means all we have left is tier 3, Will Dissly, Dallas Goedert, Mark Andrews, Tucker Kraft, and Sam Laporta. For Will Dissly, he's going up against Baltimore, and he's had 6+ targets now in 4 of his last 5 games. He's not going to rack up a ton of yards or score a lot of touchdowns, but in a matchup going up against Baltimore, they allow the 10th most fantasy points per game to the tight end position, and Dissly could be a decent PPR option here in week 12. How about Dallas Goedert going up against the Rams? We know he isn't going to be the most consistent tight end with all those offensive weapons in Philadelphia. I think it's understandable. But now a matchup going up against the Rams, who allow the 6th most fantasy points per game to the tight end position. If we could get 5 targets this week, Dallas Goedert is going to be a low-end tight end 1. That's why I got him at number 12. How about Mark Andrews going up against the Chargers? Now, Isaiah likely returns, and Mark Andrews just disappears. Not like it was some great matchup for them, though, going up against Pittsburgh. The entire offense as a whole struggled. Now a matchup going up against the Chargers. They are a top 10 defense against opposing tight ends, though, so I did have to drop Mark Andrews a few spots. Then we got Tucker Kraft going up against San Francisco. Dude came off the bye and should have just stayed on it. Only 1 target and no receptions, all while playing 93% of the snaps. There are just so many options each and every week in Green Bay. This is bound to happen from time to time. Now a tough matchup going up against San Francisco. They allow the 5th fewest fantasy points per game to the tight end position, but we've seen the ceiling of Tucker Kraft before, and with a week like this with so many buys, he can't be totally outside the top 15. And then lastly, Sam Laporta going up against the Colts. Now he missed week 11 due to injury, and man, I hate that he missed that offensive explosion of the Detroit offense. But as of right now, he's still questionable to play, even though it's a pretty good matchup. That's why I wanted to at least throw him right here at number 15, because the Indianapolis Colts allow the 7th most fantasy points per game to the tight end position. And when you have a team like Detroit who's putting up 40 points almost every single week, I felt I had to keep Sam Laporta inside the top 15, even though it's at number 15. All right, there you have my top 15 tight ends for week 12 fantasy football. Just like every other week, we got a handful of guys at the top of the list that we somewhat trust, and then after that, it's an absolute crapshoot. Really, the most important thing you can do, find some guys who have somewhat of a target share in an offense that can score touchdowns from time to time. Outside of that, there's not a whole lot of scientific method going into picking a tight end in fantasy football. The majority of them all suck. But I'm going to go ahead and get out of here for the day. Hopefully you enjoy the rest of your day. And then most importantly, do your part to make the world a better place.
Analytics off the chain, other channels not the same. Jake and Kyle, you know the name. Headliner Nation, we running the game.